I had always believed that love, real love, was meant to withstand the test of time. When I married Richard 20 years ago, I had no doubts that we would grow old together, hand in hand, watching the seasons of life unfold. But love, as I learned, does not always fade in storms. It sometimes disappears in silence. At 39, I found myself standing at the kitchen sink, staring at the soapy water, trying to recall the last time Richard had looked at me the way he used to. Lately, his presence in our home was like a shadow, there but distant, detached. He came home late, excused himself with tired smiles, and disappeared into his office, barely speaking more than a handful of words to me. I told myself it was just work, just life, just stress, until my son, Adrian, shattered that illusion. He came home that evening, his face unreadable, his movements tense. He dropped his bag by the door and stood there, watching me. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." There was something in his voice, hesitation, pain, and something else I couldn't quite place. "Of course, sweetheart." I wiped my hands and turned to him, forcing a smile. "What is it?" He hesitated before stepping closer, lowering his voice. "I saw Dad today," he said. "He was with someone." A strange coldness wrapped around my spine. "With someone?" Adrian nodded, his jaw tight. "It was after school. I went to grab coffee with some friends, and I saw him. He was parked outside the campus." That didn't seem odd. Richard's office was nearby. But then, Adrian swallowed hard. "I saw Ms. Carter, my computer teacher." Blink. Ms. Carter. She was young, probably in her late 20s, kind but strict in class. What did she have to do with this? "I saw him pick her up, and before she got in the car, he kissed her." The room tilted. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator, the distant ticking of the clock. I wanted to laugh, to tell Adrian that he was mistaken, that his father, my husband, would never. But something in his eyes told me he wasn't lying. A weight settled deep inside me, twisting in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Cleared my throat. "You're sure?" Adrian's expression darkened. "I wish I wasn't." Thousand thoughts rushed through me at once. Had I been blind? Had I ignored the signs? The late nights, the cold distance, the way he barely touched me anymore. "Mom," Adrian said, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. "I didn't want to tell you, but I couldn't. I couldn't keep this from you." I reached for the counter, gripping the edge as if it could hold me upright. "Thank you for telling me." He hesitated, then stepped closer and wrapped his arms around me. For the first time in a long while I let myself be held, because at that moment I felt like I was falling. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle against the windows. Richard had come home late, again, but this time I didn't wait for him, didn't pretend to be asleep when he slid into bed beside me. Instead, I lay there, wide awake, my heart pounding as I replayed Adrian's words in my mind. He kissed her. I turned my head slightly, watching the man beside me. Richard's back was to me. His breathing steady, unbothered, unaware that everything was crumbling around us. For the first time in years I truly saw him, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. The next morning I moved through my routine in a daze. Richard left early, barely saying a word to me. If he noticed my silence, he didn't ask about it. He just grabbed his coffee, checked his phone, and left with the same distant air he had carried for months. Adrian was waiting for me in the kitchen. "Did you sleep?" he asked, his voice gentle. I shook my head. "Not really." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You don't have to pretend to be okay, Mom." I forced a smile, reaching for his cheek. "I'll be fine." But he didn't look convinced. That day passed in a blur. I went through the motions of work, of errands, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time I thought about Richard, I felt cold, detached, like I was watching my life unravel from the outside. And through it all, Adrian stayed close. He hovered protectively, checking on me, making sure I ate, texting me throughout the day just to remind me that he was there. I didn't realize how much I needed that. That evening, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing in particular. Adrian sat beside me, his body warm against mine. "Are you going to confront him?" he asked after a long silence. I swallowed hard. "I don't know." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't get it. How could he do this to you?" I shook my head. "I don't know, sweetheart. But Adrian did. He knew exactly how he felt." The next day, Richard came home earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen when I heard the front door open, followed by Adrian's sharp voice. "You're a liar." Froze. A heavy silence followed, thick and suffocating. Then Richard's voice, low and irritated. "What are you talking about?" Adrian didn't hold back. "I saw you," he spat. "I saw you with her. I saw you kiss her. Do you have any idea what you're doing to Mom?" I stepped into the hallway just in time to see the color drain from Richard's face. He looked from Adrian to me, his mouth opening, closing, struggling for words. "Anna, don't," Adrian snapped. "You don't deserve her." Richard turned to him, anger flickering in his eyes. "You don't understand what's going on." "Then explain it," Adrian challenged. Richard hesitated. And that was all the answer we needed. Adrian scoffed. "That's what I thought. I had never seen my son like this. So fierce, so protective." His hands trembled at his sides, his jaw tight. Richard exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated." Adrian laughed bitterly. "No, it's not. You cheated. That's not complicated. That's just disgusting." Richard's eyes flicked to mine. "Anna, I don't want to hear it," I said, my voice steady. "Just go." For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue, but then he sighed, nodding slightly before turning away. As soon as the door slammed shut behind him, Adrian exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. "I hate him," he muttered. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Adrian." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Do." He had everything, and he threw it away. I didn't know what to say. He turned to me, his expression softening. "Mom, you deserve better. So much better." His words made something in me crack. Before I knew it, I was crying. Adrian pulled me into his arms without hesitation. "I've got you," he whispered. "I'll always have you." I clung to him, my fingers digging into his back, letting the warmth of his embrace steady me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. In the days that followed, Adrian became my rock. I had always known he was a kind and responsible boy, but now I saw something different in him. Something strong, unwavering. He wasn't just my son. He was a man, standing by my side in a way I never expected but desperately needed. Richard tried calling. He sent texts, leaving long-winded explanations I refused to read. There were apologies, justifications, even excuses. But none of it mattered. He had made his choice, and so had I. I didn't cry as much as I thought I would. Maybe I had already done my mourning long before I even knew the truth. What hurt the most wasn't losing Richard. It was realizing how little I had meant to him in the end. But Adrian never let me sink into that pain alone. Every morning he made sure I had breakfast, even if it was just toast and coffee. "Eat, Mom," he'd say with a soft smile. "You'll feel better after." And he was right. He complimented me in a way that made me blush like a schoolgirl. "You look beautiful today," he said one morning as I walked into the kitchen in a simple sweater and jeans. I laughed, shaking my head. "Adrian, don't be silly." "I mean it," he insisted. "You don't even realize how gorgeous you are." His words caught me off guard. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me like I was something worth admiring. Richard used to compliment me back when we were younger, but over the years his gaze had dulled, his words becoming more obligatory than genuine. But Adrian, he looked at me like he truly saw me, like I was someone worth cherishing. And he did cherish me. At night he would sit with me in the living room, watching old movies just to keep me company. Sometimes he'd wrap an arm around me, pulling me close the way he used to when he was a little boy. But now he wasn't a child. He was strong, firm. His presence warm and comforting in a way I hadn't felt in years. "You can lean on me, Mom," he murmured one evening when he noticed I was feeling down. "I'm not going anywhere." I leaned against his shoulder, closing my eyes, letting myself believe him. He never left me alone for too long. Even when he went out, he'd check in on me, texting simple things like, "Have you eaten? How are you feeling? I'm bringing you something sweet."